Welcome, everybody, to the Fun Astrology and Merriman Market Analyst Saturday Financial Podcast. I'm Thomas Miller. Thanks for joining us. This is the free weekly newsletter published every weekend on MMAcycles.com by financial analyst and wonderful astrologer Ray Merriman. And this week's column is written by Ray. And at the end, I'm going to tell you the last section is great. If you're into astrology, you could only imagine. And I'll just leave it there. Hang around. Wait for it, as they say. Let's jump into the review section for this week. First of all, an article from Tuesday's Wall Street Journal. Allies of the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell have laid the groundwork for him to push a rate cut through a divided committee at next month's meeting, even though it could draw multiple dissents. The unusual level of division inside the Fed means that, to an even greater degree than usual, the final call rests with Powell. And then this from Friday's UBS weekly blog, Dr. Paul Donovan. He says the rise of the side hustle complicates the modern economy. The self-employed content creator has an income stream and thus spending power, but that goes largely unrecognized by today's statistics. Side hustles mean that data is increasingly underreporting economic reality. It may also shift some economic value creation from large companies to very small micro companies. While large companies may use accountants and lawyers to avoid taxes, a micro company may not be liable for taxes at all. Shifting economic activity to businesses, quote unquote, that fall below current tax thresholds may challenge some government revenue streams, end quote. Now, Ray's thoughts for this week past. He says stock markets around the world got a welcome lift last week after falling to their lowest levels in at least 2 to 6 months. This fits well with the bullish seasonal holiday trend that usually starts near the sun entering Sagittarius, which began a week ago, right in the time band of MMA's geocosmic critical reversal date of November 21st to 24th, plus or minus 3 trading days. In Asia and the Pacific Rim, stock markets rallied last week. The Australian ASX made its primary bottom right on November 21st, the same day the Hang Seng made a major cycle trough. Japan's Nikkei index completed its primary cycle trough on November 19th, while China did the same on Monday, November 24th. India's Nifty was bullish all week, making a new all-time high on Friday, November 28th. In Europe, the Netherlands' AEX, Germany's DAX, and London's FTSE all bottomed on November 21st and rallied all week sharply. The SMI of Zurich also ended a good week with a double top on Friday, back at its 6-month high set on November 13th. In the U.S., the Dow Jones Industrial Average, S&P, and NASDAQ all completed primary cycle lows on November 19th to 21st and rallied smartly last week, as new cycles usually do. The Bovespa in Brazil also enjoyed a good week, soaring to a new all-time high on Friday, November 28th. The bigger story, however, was in silver, which just exploded to a new all-time high of $57.24 on Friday in the March contract. Gold also had a strong week, with the February contract rising to $42.63, well off its all-time high of $43.98 made a month ago in the nearby December contract. Even Bitcoin came back smartly from its drenching, which ended a week ago, November 21st, around 80,000. By Friday, it tested 93,000, a gain of 15%, suggesting that this too is now a new primary cycle. This fits with the outlook given in last Sunday's special MMA options webinar, which called for a primary cycle low and a 20 to 35% rally in the follow-up that was sent to all participants right afterwards. And speaking of that options webinar, the Treasury notes may be setting up for the top of that head and shoulders pattern that was also discussed. In addition, other strategies were given during the event that appear to be setting up to unfold. The recording of that webinar is still available on MMAcycles.com and is very valuable. I might add that in that webinar, it began with Ray talking about the whole cycle concept at MMAcycles.com. So if you'd like to learn more about that, the beginning of that webinar is worth the whole groundwork of exactly what this work is all about and would be worth the investment just for that alone. Plus, there's a big Black Friday sale on the website through Sunday the 30th, so you could also probably save a few bucks and pick a few other things up as well. Let's jump over to the short-term geocosmics now. First of all, a quote from William Galston from Tuesday's Wall Street Journal. He said, "Every nation must strive to preserve three basic elements of its existence: sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity." Russia's aggression has already compromised Ukraine's control over its territory, and the proposal now under discussion would make matters worse. Under the terms of the original 28-point plan, reduced to 19 points after U.S.-Ukraine discussions in Geneva, Ukraine would be forced to pull back its troops from the parts of the Donetsk region it currently controls, and this territory would be internationally recognized as belonging to the Russian Federation. This provision would give international legitimacy to a naked land grab, and it would deprive Ukraine of one of its strongest defensive lines against future Russian aggression, just as ceding the Sudetenland in 1938 made it nearly impossible for Czechoslovakia to resist Germany's army in 1939. No sovereign nation can be asked to forfeit the military forces it deems necessary to defend itself. End quote. Now, Ray's comments on the short-term geocosmics. This weekend finds both Mercury and Saturn ending their retrograde cycles, which for many will be a relief to see the trickster, Mercury retrograde, return to its normal habitat. More importantly, when two or more planets change directions nearby to one another like this, it often signals the end or start of primary market cycles. We noted that stock indices and Bitcoin probably made primary cycle lows in the past week. But now we have to wonder about gold and silver. Was last week's run-up a case of intermarket bearish divergence under these planetary stations? We also note that Venus ends its grand water trine to Jupiter and Saturn-Neptune this weekend, which may be an astrological correlate for the robust rallies in world stock markets last week. But Venus is also in opposition to Uranus on Sunday, November 30th, which could relate to the powerful upside breakout in silver. Or it could also portend to a reversal from a case of bearish intermarket divergence. With Uranus, it can be either or both. That is, it could be a breakout to a new multi-month or even yearly high-low, or a sudden reversal. The loss of the grand trine may become a concern this week, especially with Venus in opposition to Uranus, for the markets that have rallied. The next big aspect confluence starts on December 9th, with Mars forming a waning square to Saturn. This is a warlike dynamic, where one side wants to force its will on the other, and the other puts up a powerful resistance. Equity indices do not generally like this type of conflict, but commodities often do. And the next day, December 10th, Neptune turns direct, followed by Mars forming a waning square to Neptune. Thus, any conflict is likely to witness more propaganda and falsehoods as attempts are made to redirect the narrative away from the truth. November had the benefit of grand trines, which brought out a sense of hope about restoring sanity in various conflicts around the world. December, on the other hand, will be fraught with several waning squares involving the Sun, Venus, and Mars to Saturn and Neptune in the late mutable signs. The galactic center at 27 degrees Sagittarius will be activated. The entire world may be drawn into this struggle. Mercury may be done with its tricks, but politicians and warmongers are likely to resume theirs. Now, this week's longer-term thoughts, the section that I was talking about, and we get started with a quote from "Don't Be Shy, Gratitude is Good for You," from Friday's Wall Street Journal, written by the incomparable Peggy Noonan. She says, practical advice from one Charles Dickens in Sketches by Boz. Quote, "Reflect upon your present blessings, of which every man has many, not on your past misfortunes, of which all men have some." End quote. G.K. Chesterton took a different tack. Gratitude is, he said, the highest form of thought. Tolstoy took it a step further. You can infer from his work that he thought the moments in which we feel the greatest thankfulness are those in which we are most noble. Don't be embarrassed by talk of gratitude this weekend, or think of it as rote or corny. Feel thankful enough, long enough, and it amounts to a stance toward life. A good one. End quote. Now Ray's comments. What a wonderful Thanksgiving this was, as I hosted about 15 of the world's top astrologers on a 45-minute call to wish one another a happy holiday. But it turned into much more than that, as we evolved our well wishes into a lively discussion on what is happening in the heavens and in the world. The thing about this group is that each of them is an original, out-of-the-box thinker. Each had a unique take that inspired further discussion into areas no one expected, but were very much found to be of great value. One of the topics that came up was about AI. Ray's wife, Antonia Langsdorff, mentioned a podcast that she had just listened to that pointed out how AI's tendency toward hallucinations is causing a downdraft in the reliability of the information it provides. As more people provide information online from AI that is derived from inaccurate information generated by AI, that's the hallucination, the more that misinformation pollutes and even downgrades the pool of information that AI regenerates in further retrieval of certain subjects. For instance, a student conducts a research project based on quote-unquote facts generated by AI about the subject, but those facts are not always reliable. The student posts the research study based on the inaccurate facts online, and then it becomes part of the agent's retrieval when asked about that subject in the future. This process of proving inaccurate information and then repeating it online compounds the problem of getting correct facts and information as we go along. Astrologers Demetra George, Susie Cox, Christine Skinner, Darby Coatello, David Cochran, Matt Carnicelli, and Alexander Eamsregich each had a refreshing response to that and the future of AI. All pretty much agreed that 1, we don't know how this is all going to end up, as it is a wave of innovation that is still being birthed. 2, AI has to be treated primarily as a source information and not so much as an emotional support system, even though it is developing intuitive functions. But 3, those intuitive and emotional factors are exposing some to mental health challenges and dependencies in place of healthy social interactions and earnest fact-checking. But 4, AI will be a positive force for our evolution, both personally and collectively, and so it is important to adjust well to this new pathway ahead for the world. It is not going away, and it will continually improve over the long haul. Actually, the conversations were much more exciting than this simple recount. There was a wealth of correlations shared about this AI movement, including Pluto in Aquarius, Uranus trine Pluto in air signs, and even Saturn and Neptune as the midpoint, forming a double sextile to both Uranus and Pluto, each with a different twist. When someone mentioned the chaos engulfing the world today and wondered if it would ever end, I pointed out that I think it is peaking with Saturn acting like an eclipse to Neptune. Saturn is between Earth and Neptune. Therefore, it is Saturn collecting the power of the Uranus trine to Pluto presently. However, when Saturn starts to separate from its conjunction to Neptune, the power of Neptune will begin to accelerate, as it, and not Saturn, will still be in that double sextile to Uranus and Pluto, collecting their power that Saturn had consumed over the past year. That too elicited further insights from this remarkable group of very intelligent, experienced, and professional astrologers. All in all, I would say that this discussion with such wonderful, thought-provoking astrologer friends of mine made this the best Thanksgiving of my lifetime. It was far and away the most intelligent and inspiring conversation I have had with astrologers in quite some time. And for that, I am very thankful that we still connect with one another, even after working together over the past 40 years in many cases. What a blessing. Enjoy your holidays. The favorable seasonality for stocks is now underway with the Sun in Sagittarius, and it's also a new and young primary cycle. The Bulls should love this season. Amen and amen. And that concludes this week's newsletter. On behalf of the entire MMA team, the folks that you hear and the ones that you don't, wishing you a continued wonderful holiday weekend. I'll be back on Fun Astrology on Monday to kick off next week, and we'll be back here again next Saturday. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to check out that sale at MMAcycles.com.